Welcome to Season 1, Episode 2 of A Story Club Global Politics. This is a unique venture streaming simultaneously from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, Dehra Dun in India, and San Francisco in the United States. We speak with people from around the world to get a deep understanding of politics and political events at both a global and a local level. We go beyond the sound bites and the spin, and we get insider perspectives and understandings that you won't get anywhere else. Today, my guests are Reverend Dr. Barbara Reynolds from the US and Dr. Carolyn Cooper from Jamaica. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Very glad to be here.
All right. Well, our topic this week is Black Lives Matter from different perspectives. Now, I'll just set it up very quickly. The Black Lives Matter movement has made many thoughtful and concerned persons conflicted. The overwhelming majority of people around the world support the fundamental goals of dignity and equal human rights for African Americans, African peoples, and other oppressed and or marginalized peoples in the US and around the world. However, calls for tearing down historic public statues, violent destruction of public and private property, looting and anarchy, defunding the police, renaming geographic locations to remove certain names from public memory, setting up of autonomous zones, sometimes complete with ruling warlords, mass rituals of kneeling, anti-white racism, and other aspects do not enjoy the same support. So what I have two guests here who have spent their lives on issues of dealing with dignity and rights for African peoples in the United States and Jamaica and further afield. And I think that they would provide an excellent background and discussion points for some of these issues. So welcome.
Thank you.
Right. Why don't you start by giving our audience a bit about your background, and particularly as it relates to the issues that the current Black Lives Matter movement is also dealing with. So could you, that would be the civil rights history of yourself, Reverend Reynolds, and also your work with oral culture in Jamaica and dancehall, Carolyn. Well, let's start off with Dr. Reynolds.
Okay. I guess I have to go back when I was a student at Ohio State University. And at that time, our parents did not, or no, teachers did not equip us with the knowledge of what was going on as far as segregation and violence. I saw Selma. And so as a student with Black students and white students, we were sort of global. We came to the South. And this was the first time in my entire life that I understood, because I had a brown face and kinky hair, I could be killed, because we hooked up with the Dr. King's movement. And one night, we were young and they had put us in homes with people and said, do not go out after dark. And being young, we said, okay. But then being young, we said, let's go out after dark and find some place to have a party. And so we went to this roadside inn and we saw white people there, but we hadn't been schooled to know that they hated us. So we just walked on high. And they chased us out of air. And when chased us, we had a souped up jalopy, and they chased us. And the next day they put a roadblock for us, and we might have lost our lives there. And that really brought me into the civil rights movement as an activist. As a journalist, I fought for every kind of right that you can think of globally, anti-apartheid, Vietnam War, while also facing extreme segregation, discrimination within the news media. as a columnist because I would not take on the ethos or understanding that white privileged males had, which I was eventually fired, and I just began to write books. My latest book was of my mentor, Coretta Scott King, which is my life, my love, my legacy, traveling with her through the back through all of this pain that she got to, where her home was burnt down when she was a teenager by white racists, and living with her and traveling with her to see the changes that the civil rights movement made. She was actually able to live the dream. So I sort of want to stop there, and I'll later talk about Black Lives Matter. But I
Okay.
just want the background of
Right.
where I come from.
That's very fascinating and inspiring stuff. Carolyn, how about yourself? Let our listeners and audience know the work you've been doing.
Yeah, well, my conscientization, to use a fancy term, also began at the University of the West Indies, Mona, Jamaica, in the 1960s. I got to UWI the very same month that Walter Rodney, the Black Power advocate, was banned from the campus. And I took part in the student demonstration against the banning. And, you know, the campus was locked down for a week. We couldn't go anywhere. And it was an occasion for us to begin to talk about the significance of Rodney's work. I had come on campus as a naive 17-year-old. I didn't know anything about Rodney, about Black Power, really. But that experience opened my eyes to the reality.
Where in Jamaica did you come from?
I was at that time, I was living in Norman Gardens, a sort of lower middle class community.
So in Kingston itself, right?
My father was a tailor, my mother an elementary school teacher. So we weren't the poorest of the poor, but we were not rich. But we had enough. I say that I was fortunate. I got all that I needed. And so that Rodney demonstration helped me to see that as a Black person, a young Black person, I needed to try to understand the history of oppression in a very practical kind of way. For example, when I went on campus in October 1968, my hair was straightened. By the end of the Christmas holidays, I was back on campus with an afro. And that physical transformation represented an ideological transformation. The whole Black is beautiful ideology had hit us, and Black America provided a model for us in the Caribbean about how we should start thinking about emancipation. So when I graduated from UWI, went to University of Toronto, where I did my MA and PhD. I wrote my thesis on Derek Walcott. And one of the interesting issues I saw in Walcott's work was a kind of divide between the poetry and the plays. His poetry was in English, was very Eurocentric for the most part, but it was in his plays that he started to explore the Creole culture, the folk culture. And that divide, which I think he tried to bridge, is central to the kind of scholarship that I've done, because I've focused on the popular end of the literary continuum, looking at writers like Louise Bennett in Jamaica, Sistering Theatre Collective, the dub poets, Mikey Smith, Jean Binta Breeze, although, you know, sometimes the poets don't really want that label dub because it seems to set them apart from other poets, but they have to claim that performance element in their work, which, you know, is not so much central to other kind of poetry. Walker, for example, was a terrible reader of his poetry, was very boring. So the performance, the drama is such an important part in oral societies like ours. So from that, I ended up writing about Bob Marley's lyrics as literary text, and then I gradually moved over to dancehall lyrics. And that was the beginning of the end of my, my career as a proper academic, you know. And so I had the idea to set up a reggae studies center at the university, which I did. As part of that work, we invited a whole range of artists to come in and speak. They were happy to come. And so we had that closure of the gap between town and gown. More recently, I invited Vibes Cartel to speak at the university. This was before he was accused of murder. So he was bad, but not bad to that. And it was a spectacular event. Over 5,000 people came. The university has never had an event like that, and the administration will never forgive me for it. But it demonstrated the power of popular culture. And Cartel really is a fantastic lyricist. I'm just so sorry that he took this world boss title so seriously that now he's incarcerated. But you know, that is life. And we also hosted the launch of Buju Bantal's album, Rasta Got Soul. I mean, that was another packed audience. But I think looking at popular culture is a way of getting in touch with the creativity of oppressed peoples in Jamaica who refuse to be defined by the elite who tell them your language is bad, you're ugly, you must step back, you know, you have no place in this society really except as domestic servants, as manual laborers. And popular music becomes a way through which people reclaim their humanity, reclaim their agency, and put up a fight against the system.
Yes, I remember in the early 90s in Jamaica, when I was there, when I was a student, and seeing, you gave a talk about how Shabba Ranks was perhaps more progressive than Bob Marley. And that was just outrageous.
Around sexuality, yes.
Yes.
It's that kind of thing that upsets people because how could you say that? But when you listen to Shabba Ranks' lyrics, he talks about, you know, don't make a man come and use you and you don't benefit from it. People will say, oh, that's straight up prostitution. No, what Shabba is saying, put a value on yourself because he knows how the man them can be dog and just come and use you and go about their business. And no, women, put value on it. And in fact, that philosophy of Shabba's is very similar to some of the folk wisdom that we see in the Proverbs, where, for example, you have a proverb that says, you know, a man has to have money before he can go and look a wife. And one of the most vulgar versions of it is you have to find a place to put your head before you find a hole to put your hood. So you can't go looking for sex and you don't have any place to put this woman that you claim you desire and want to spend time with. You know, so Shabba is really talking about those kinds of grassroots realities. Whereas Marley, some of Marley's lyrics were, you know, yes, he had a little thing with go downtown to see Miss Brown with the sugar and booga wooga, but I think Marley's view of sexuality and women was more repressive, more Rastafari oriented. Where, you know, the Rasta woman is the daughter who have to stop, you know, she has to stay behind the man and so on. And the whole Rastafari liberty is very patriarchal. And women have been forced, you know, people like Maureen Rowe wrote a brilliant article a long time ago published in Caribbean Quarterly, or maybe in Jamaica Journal, I can't remember which one, about the struggle of Rasta women to step out of those defining boundaries.
Yeah. I mean, and this is interesting because in the American context where Black Lives Matter started, you know, it's a different context of you know, where African American peoples are a minority, and in Jamaica where it's a majority after colonialism, but it has the colonial heritage and the class issues, which also do play out in America, but it's kind of suppressed because of the larger struggle. So these things are interesting, and then it's also interesting the way you said, Carolyn, how the American experience actually inspired you and inspired us in the Caribbean. I have to include myself
here. I mean,
here.
A lot of the books by African-American writers were banned in Jamaica.
That's right.
They even banned an innocuous book called Black Beauty, which was about a horse, but they didn't know the government, the backward Jamaica Labour Party government, they didn't even read the books, they were banned. So a book about a horse called Black Beauty was banned. I guess they thought it meant that black was beautiful, and it was part of that whole rhetoric of Black power, so it had to be banned.
And it's interesting how Caribbean peoples also influenced the American movement. Marcus Garvey and Stokely Carmichael.
But a lot of Caribbean, a lot of African Americans that have been high profile activists do have Caribbean roots, you know, and you wonder without taking away anything from this tradition of struggle of native-born African Americans, if that Caribbean experience with parents and grandparents coming out of predominantly Black societies may not have shaped how their children and grandchildren viewed themselves in white America, that they didn't accept the devaluation of themselves that people perhaps with a much longer history of oppression might have had.
Absolutely. So, Reverend Reynolds, so let's talk about the Black Lives Matter movement of today and how it relates to your experience with the movement of Dr. King. And I mean, I know then Coretta Scott King, and you wrote a biography of Jesse Jackson as well. So,
Yeah.
so you've really been connected to that, let's say, mainstream struggle, civil rights struggle that has so shaped the United States since the 1960s. Yeah.
Let me go back to where I was, because I had to learn oppression and experience it as a writer, because I was writing for mainstream papers. But I want to go back to 1969, I believe, to the Black Panthers, and you'll see why I can relate this to something else, the Black Lives Matter. There was a young man named Fred Hampton, and he was head of the Black Panther Party in Chicago. He was a very outspoken, intelligent young man. He wanted to be a lawyer. And they were doing free feeding programs for people and medical programs for people in the city. So one night I got a call from my editors to go to his home. And when I went to his home, there were squad cars everywhere. And I came in the building, and it was blood all over the floor, and a spread where they had carried his body out. And they also killed Mark Clark. And so as a young person, that time I was dating a police officer who told me this is a shoot in, because the rest of the media was saying this is a shootout. And he said, no, these bullets, this was a shoot in. So I had to fight within my institution to say this is a shoot in. And I just thought, because this was murder in cold blood, that somebody would pay for his life. But there had been a program, COINPRO, that the J. Edgar Hoover had installed. It said these Black Panthers, some of them who were armed, but because that's Second Amendment rights, the kind of people that showed up here in a couple of months ago at the state capitol in Michigan armed, and nobody bothered them, but yet they were murdered in cold blood. And I just waited and covered the stories for all these years, thinking that there was justice. And so then I came on to Rodney King, who was beat and mugged. And then I put that together with what is the Black body in America worth? How we come from the same root. For example, when I was in Senegal, I was there at this place called the Door of No Return. And they showed how Blacks from different parts of Africa, they were put in these cabins or caves, like these buildings, and fatten up so they could get on the slave ships. And then when you get out there, like if I had 3 sisters, they would send one to the Caribbean, maybe one to Haiti, and one to the Americas. And so we were all one people. And I think in our DNA, we stayed one people. I mean, I have no problem going to Jamaica and feeling like, hey, I'm that, or going to Africa and saying I'm that, because we really are one people. But the Black Lives Matter, I wrote a piece for the Washington Post, which seemed to think that I was not favoring them. But what I was trying to point out was that I've seen groups of young people murdered in cold blood. Now I see this other group of young people. In fact, I saw an image yesterday where it was a young woman, maybe she was in her 20s, and she was photographed in front of a burning car. And her sign said, "We're not your ancestors and we will F you up." And I sent back a text, "And they will kill you." And they will kill you, especially if you're not have the covering of a large group. So I was trying to bridge the gap between people of my generation and young people so that we could become one. Because what happened, Bobby Rush, who is a congressman here, when he saw that Mark Clark and Fred Hampton were murdered, he ran to Jesse Jackson, and that group embraced him. But I now see such a bridge between the older people and Black Lives Matter that it bothers me, because as a minister, I also, believe I can see things prophetically. And right now, the whole world is embracing Black Lives Matter because they understand. I mean, we saw a man being killed in cold blood in front of everyone with a white policeman nonchalantly with his hands in his pocket, bearing out on a man while he just said, "I can't breathe." And this changed the attitudes of some of us who might not have been quick to embrace Black Lives Matter, because we saw that finally people were beginning to see what we've been talking about. And from the times when it was not a law to lynch Black, in fact, I was reading something the other day, in America, there's a few places where it's still not against the law to lynch Blacks. It's strange. So, this is a monumental moment where, yes, now is their time. There's a Kairos moment where sometimes what you do and what God wills comes together at a perfect time. And this is it. But I don't want to see it destroyed through violence, either through people from the outside. Like, for example, there was a white guy yesterday that was going through Minneapolis, just breaking windows, because they want those who are against us, like President Trump is sending troops to different places to stir up violence because he needs something to run on. He can't run. He has terribly displayed ignorance and incompetence in managing the COVID-19. He can't run on that. We are dying daily by the thousands because of ineptitude. The economy is sinking. He can't run on that. But if he can go back to the pages of Ronald Reagan, the law and order president, then he'll have something to run on. If he can make white folks afraid, which he's doing it. He put out a statement this week. Now that I'm president, you won't have to worry about people coming in and bringing your property rates down. I mean, just total racism and fear that these groups of federal troops, Donald Trump, we're going to protect you white people. And
well,
so
there are two aspects that I want you to elaborate on a little, and about the movement itself. And that one is, I'd like you to elaborate a little bit more about the gap between the older generation and the younger generation, and why you think that is, and so what are the points that are preventing it? Is it like cultural, or and then two, is it the same thing, or is it, how similar is it? It sounds very similar to me, but I'd like your insight, about the debates between, let's say, the Black Power elements, the Black nationalist elements in the 1960s, and the civil rights elements, so like the Panthers versus the Southern Christian leadership conference for, that,
Yeah.
that type of thing. So if you could just elaborate for that from your experience.
I'm trying to remember both of those at one time.
Yeah. So one is the generation gap today,
The
and the
generation
other
gap,
is the
I
sort
can
of
talk to that.
violence,
Yeah.
non-violence thing,
I can
or
own
nationalism.
I
civil
can
rights.
own my own issues, and I can't say I speak to all
Sure.
seniors,
Yeah.
but I can say for me, the Black Lives Matters, the profanity turned me
Right.
off.
Yeah.
I'm just not a person that will go around you if you are cursing MFG. I'm gonna I can't take that. So
yeah, I understand.
the things. Then the other things is that they made it clear they did not want the church involved. They didn't want the church.
Yeah.
And that and be a minister that talks to me, you don't want the church, you want to. Then in fact, I was talking to Black Lives Matter from California, and they say they are not thinking about polite culture.
Yeah.
So now you think how I came up through the King movement, and I traveled Mrs. King for years, and she would not even allow us to talk bad about her enemies, these white people that were throwing us in jail and everything else. She would say, there's some good in everybody. And she would say, the hate will not, you have to go forth with love for humanity. And hate will only make you just as bad as the other person. So, I came up with that philosophy, but I did know that these two movements interacted. It's like Malcolm used to tell Dr. King, well, you got to be glad we're there, because people can look at you, look at me, and choose you. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So these movements have intersected. John Lewis was part of SNCC, which was a more hands-on, than Dr. King. So these two movements have interacted. And I think today, where the things that bothered me about the Black Lives Matters movement bothers me less now, because I'm thinking, okay, they cuss, they do these things, but yet I got to get over this and let them understand. Can they respect their elders? Is that too much to ask?
Yeah.
I just this one thing, and I'll tell you about this respect quickly. I went to do a documentary about some Native Americans, and we had the chiefs and everybody together. These was great big men with muscles and strong and everything. I'm sitting here with my watch. I'm saying, when are we gonna get started? And one woman walked in the door. The men stood up, and they said down. They said, my mother entered, now we can speak. I was almost speechless, because I had never received this kind of respect or even thought about it. But can the younger people, millennials, respect us? And can we get over the language? And we can't get over the violence, because if they continue to advocate it, I'm not just thinking they're advocating, but not suppress it, this is going to be the horse that Ronald Reagan, Trumpism rides right back in the White House about. So I have to keep talking about nonviolence, what we learned from Jesus, from Mahatma Gandhi. That has been the program that changed. That system helped us get the Voting Rights Act that helped produce all of us, including Black Lives Matter. And that voting rights now is really being suppressed. And we should put all our energies, all our efforts in getting through that. And then we can have these little arguments about you cussing and you don't want old people around. Later, let's get in the door, because the house is burning down and we're going to have to put some water on it.
Right. I want to bring Carolyn back into this. And I know there's probably a lot of things that you'd want to address from there, but you can do though, but I want you to put it in this context, because I know one of the very interesting things that you bring up in your work always, and you're very sensitive to this, is about the class elements of the struggle and these sorts of things. And it's very interesting in Trinidad. I don't know if it was the same in Jamaica, but the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, kind of came down here, but it's through cable TV and through and so there was a protest at our Queen's Park Savannah in the capital, but it was very visibly middle class people, very and you know, with much more of the LGBTQ kind of sympathies and whatnot, which was not the sort of mass Black consciousness or movement. And in fact, later on, when there were sort of eruptions because of police violence, you saw the divide, the class divide that is part of it too. And it's interesting the way when it translates here, you know, how it went to the middle class. Now, so have you seen a class element at play in Jamaica on this, in the way the Black Lives Matter movement has gone down there?
I wouldn't say that there's a class issue with Black Lives Matter in Jamaica. What I would say is that we have our own Black Lives Matter issues,
yeah,
you know, that we're not dealing with at the level of demonstrations and so on.
Absolutely.
You have people incarcerated for decades without trial, and nobody is putting up a fuss about it. These are poor Black people. So,
that's right.
you know, we tend to follow America in the same way Black Power inspired us. Now Black Lives Matter, and we're falling back at them, as we say here. But we have to really look at our own issues and see what are we doing to transform our own societies. So you got a bit of resistance in Jamaica from people who said, yeah, Black Lives Matter, but what about our Black lives? So people didn't jump on that US bandwagon in the way that others might have expected. And so if we don't stand up for principle in our own society, when we start to look at the US and talk, they will be very hypocritical.
Mm-hmm.
So that hypocrisy is something that we need to confront. It does make sense to be saying, using the Black Lives Matter tag without translating it into the local reality of a lot of Black lives in Jamaica not really mattering.
Exactly, because your work has really focused on that and been ignored and vilified, and you've been criticized, and but it didn't have the glamour of the foreign American blessing in that sense. You know?
And in fact, one of the issues that I have focused on, in addition to popular culture, is the question of language. You know, the language spoken by the majority of people in Jamaica is not taken seriously by the elites. It is just dismissed as unimportant. It's the usual corruption of English kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you devalue someone's language, you're actually devaluing their very humanity. Because what we're saying is, you don't have any language, you're not a human being, you're an animal. And so we need to just stop and say, yes, Jamaican is a language. Let us see how we can use this language to teach English, since we know English is the official language. English is a global lingua franca. It has value. Let children learn the language properly. But even though learning English is a part of the curriculum in Jamaica, we're not teaching English efficiently, largely because we're not taking the children's home language seriously. You cannot teach a child in a language that he or she does not understand. So you have to use the home language as a language of instruction to get them to learn. So, but you know, once a month I write my newspaper column in Jamaica, and the abuse. But the irony of it is, the same people who are abusing me and saying that this is foolishness, they're actually reading it. They're saying, well, if you read it, you read it enough to know what I'm saying. Then what is the problem? You understand it, but they get on as something that is hard to read. Every now and then I will respond to them and say, yes, it's hard to read. It's intellectually challenging. It's good for your brain, you know, and hard work matters.
Yeah, Dr. Reynolds, you wanted to say something?
I want to go back to the class issue that you raised, because that's one that we're looking at right now. You can see a system where innocent Blacks are treated worse than guilty white people. and that's in our criminal justice system. We've had two of the President Trump's good friends who said they were guilty, that he got them out of jail. Now you switch to the many prisons around America now, San Quentin, others, where they cannot get out. And some of these are nonviolent crimes. They are huddled together. They can't social distance, and and they're dying rapidly. That's a class issue. The other class issue that is breaking my heart is that the president has said the kids have to go back to school. And the Secretary of Education says, well, if they don't go back to school, we don't send the school money that they need for a special ed or other kinds of things they need, food, and for example. But the many of the parents, they would lose their jobs if they don't go to work. So now you have the kids going back to school without safety plans and action, because the federal government is saying just go back, because they see poor and middle class children as collateral damage. You see, the rich people, they send their kids to private schools funded by corporations who want these kids to graduate and come into corporations to their society. So they're going to have disinfecting, they're going to have air circulating correctly, they're going to have social, they have enough space to social distance. Our schools, some of them have 60 kids in one class, no place to social distance. They're getting off the buses. I've seen them huddled together. They're wearing masks, but they're being like kids. They're hitting each other, everything. And so the poor schools, middle class schools, the kids have to go because their parents have to work. But the other kids, when they say, well, oh, just shelter at home. Well, you should see the homes they're sheltering in. They have cable, they have broadband, they have all the things and they have tutors to come in and do all this stuff. But that's a class issue. Mm-hmm. And we continue, the class issue is so bad now that housing, the segregation is a class issue. And so we are divided because that's what the president does. He sticks to his kind. And if you're not white and a Trumpite, you're in another class, and that class does not count. So we're definitely dealing with the class issue.
There are two issues there that I'd like you to give us some insight on about the white and the black issue. I mean, I think that the involvement of Antifa, to me, is problematic. I don't know what you think about that, but it seems problematic to me. But
you have to define that for me, because
but before we get into that, I'd like to understand if you, on your end, from where you are, see any sort of internal, right? So not necessarily between African Americans and whites, but within the African American community, any sort of we talked about the age, the sort of generational difference, but like even if you go in the early days of the NAACP and on Garvey, you had Du Bois on the one hand, you had Garvey on the other hand, and I'll say it here. People in the NAACP used to make fun of the Garvey. I'd say UNIA. One of the cruel nicknames they had for the UNIA was the ugliest Negroes in America, right? Because they were the more West African looking types, as opposed to the Du Bois in his suit and his mustache and his, there are these elements that I think Black Lives Matter is kind of, it seems that it might be raising these issues, but I really haven't heard or seen any of these kind of divisions. I know later on with the nationalist people, like with SNCC, when SNCC turned from non-violent to nationalist and Black Power, there were these kind of issues raised, but I'm not even sure if it was
Well, here's
properly
the
analyzed
issue.
at that point.
Yeah, I don't see that, but I do see
Okay.
two issues that really is what is happening with white people. Now, if you look at some of these marches and protests, like in Minneapolis, it's majority white. And I've been going around to speaking at white college campuses for a couple of years, and I've noticed something really different because the way they cheered what I said and accepted what I said. And, you know, it wasn't just something rosy. I said, I don't think these white people, these young whites, wants to put up with the kind of society they were seeing. And that was before George Floyd. I
Yeah.
think that the young white people, students, they are sick of all of this racism and division. And that's why you can see these white faces. Of course, there were whites in the civil rights movement, but not like this, where sometimes there were majority. The other day in I think it was Oregon, Portland, white mothers from the suburbs surrounded the protesters, thinking they wouldn't be gassed, but they were still gassed. I've never seen this kind of thing before. On the other hand, I've never seen white supremacy being so real here, so openly, because the president has given that a green card, and there's been, the Charleston white supremacists came and shot down, I think it was 9 people or 11 people in the church. There's been other people. My niece came over the other day. She drove over to see me because she had seen how a white supremacist a man came up beside a car and shot this young woman in the head, murdered her. This stuff is not getting out. And she says, Auntie, I'm sort of afraid to drive my car. And when I see somebody, she's anxiously, there's 6 people, I think the last month or so, that have been hung. They had nooses wrapped around their neck, and they said they all committed suicide. But why would all of a sudden that Black men would start hanging themselves? That doesn't make sense. So, we have other issues between this interaction, because I don't see, this Black Lives Matter thing being, the rich versus the poor, because people, I'm saying, I know, I'm saying I'm not going to march, but I'm going to send them money to march. So I see us coming together because things are so bad that what we don't like about each other can't matter right now. Yeah. Because we have an enemy that's so big. We're struggling here for our lives. We can't even go, to travel. They don't want us. I don't know about Trinidad or Jamaica. I used to go to the Bahamas a lot, and they say, now y'all can't come because you have too many diseases. So we used to be this great, powerful giant that people looked up to us. And Black Lives Matter, has more of a following, I believe, than the president, because he's not looked up upon except this rich class of people, of the Republicans, who are disgraceful people. So no, I think we're getting over our differences, not spreading them.
Okay, that's an interesting insight from your end. Now, Carolyn, I want to ask you now something, and this would be relevant to Dr. Reynolds later too, but about the removal of statues and the renaming of places. That became an issue here. People wanted to remove the Columbus statue. It remains up now. I have put in my view on it. I don't think that it should come down, but that doesn't mean I'm celebrating Columbus in any way at all. But I know you've said certain things, but can you tell us your position on that in the Jamaican context?
In the Jamaican context, we don't have that many European statues up. Queen Victoria is still in the park that was originally named after her, and we have Columbus, but we don't have too many others. Now, my problem with taking down these statues is that it looks as though we're trying to rewrite history. We can't rewrite history. My suggestion is to put up a counter narrative. Leave Columbus, but put up somebody beside him that represents the alternative narrative. So I don't know how feasible that is, but I just have a little anxiety about the idea that if you take down the statue, the history goes with it. The history won't disappear. We will still have that history that we have to come to terms with. Maybe the statue is a symbolic representation of oppression. Yes, so maybe we should critique it, but I'm not sure that taking it down is going to solve anything. But I understand that people want to take it down.
Yeah.
I am more concerned about
you've been to Port of Spain before, right?
Yeah.
And have you seen the Columbus statue we have here?
I don't remember it.
Yeah, exactly. That's one major point. Nobody really cares about it where it is in Tambridge Square. But right across from it, there's another sculpture that was done in the 70s. I can't remember the name, but I think it's the best sculpture we have in Trinidad. It's this very dynamic, fluid thing of men beating pan, and it's like Black freedom, right?
Yes.
So and it's the energy of the statue. Yeah, and that was done from the 70s, right? So
that's the kind of thing I think that should be done. Alternatives.
Yes,
if you go to Barcelona and you see the statue for Columbus, let me tell you, Columbus is way up in the air. You have to be looking up to see the base that he's on. I don't know how many feet it is. And it's okay for the people in Spain to venerate Columbus, but not, that is not our story.
That's right.
In addition to that, I'm more concerned about the new statues that we have been putting up in Jamaica in the supposedly the post-colonial period. For example, there's a pair of statues, monuments supposedly to emancipation in Emancipation Park in Kingston. Now that monument upsets me tremendously.
Is that the Edna Manley one?
No, this is one done by Laura Facey Cooper. Okay. And the problem with it, if you can find an image to put up when during the conversation, it's these two naked people looking up into the sky, their hands at the side, passive. There's none of the energy of the revolutionary struggle for emancipation that you would want to see there. It is a re-inscription of enslavement as far as I'm concerned. And the artist, white Jamaican, and I don't think it's because she's white. I think it's just that her vision is limited, that she doesn't understand that nakedness is not the same as emancipation. That's that, yes, you have European statues of naked people, but that is not our story. Black people like to dress up. We love to bling. Even in enslavement, people exercise aesthetic choices. One of my favorite stories is documented by the Australian historian Barry Higman, who worked in Jamaica at the university for several years. He talks about this planter who went to England, came home, and brought some white fabric for the people on his plantation, which he gave out, for people to dress up at Christmas. So he asked one of the older women, and this is where we see the age difference too, the older women, how the women like the cloth. And she very diplomatically said, these young people, I really don't understand them, but anyhow, you will see, something to that effect. Christmas Day, when the people came up to the Great House, as was usually the custom, everybody dressed in fabric, colored fabric, nobody was wearing the fabric that the man brought. They said that everybody on the estate had decided what they were going to wear. Now, it suddenly struck me that maybe he brought colored fabric and everybody came up in white. I can't remember how it went, no.
Right.
But the point is, they had already decided what they were going to wear, and that is what they wore. Later down in the week, they came in the fabric that he had brought for them. So that, even in slavery, people exercised choice about how they were going to dress, how they were going to present themselves, how they saw their Black body. They saw their body as beautiful, that needed to be dressed as it suited them. And now you're going to create a monument to emancipation with two naked people.
Yeah.
So that is the kind of monument that I would like to see removed.
Yeah.
Removed because it does not
kind
represent our contemporary reality. I don't think it should be destroyed. They could find another place to put it, but not in a park named Emancipation Park. Now, the same thing, we had the same problem with the monument to Marcus Garvey. The person who did it, one of the Watsons, both of them are sculptors. Barrington Watson's sons. I can't remember the name of the one who did the horrible Marcus Garvey monument. I've just blanked out his name, I guess, deliberately. And everybody complained it didn't look like Garvey. Sculptures are a very tricky thing, and the finish had Garvey's face looking spotted and scarred. People put up a big protest, and eventually it was taken down. Then the same artist is asked to do another one, and it is almost as bad. I took Garvey's son to see it, and when he looked at it, he said, "This is a face of defeat." Now, this now is done by a Black Jamaican, so this is why I'm making the point. It's not about the race of the sculptor, it's a vision. How can you have a monument to Garvey in Jamaica that represents the face of defeat? So I think one of the problems with statuary in the Caribbean is sometimes that we don't have artists with the vision to carry forward the message that many of us would like to see memorialized. So we have to think carefully about what are these monuments saying? What do they represent? Who are they speaking for? Laura Facey Cooper said that her vision of emancipation is not about chains being broken. That's fine. But if you're going to be doing a public monument to the Jamaican people, you can't impose your unique vision on the monument. You have to start to think about who is this monument for and what do people expect. I am a medium. This monument, yes, is my vision too, but my vision must be enhanced by a sophisticated understanding of the culture.
Dr. Reynolds, could you give me your take on the? It looks like it's kind of dying down now, but certainly for a long while, a focus seemed to be to just tear down statues all over the country. What's your take on that? You think it's necessary? You're critical of it? What's your view?
I think that I would like some of them torn down because they give the wrong story.
Anyone in particular you are particularly offended at?
Let me just deal with Columbus, Christopher Columbus.
Yeah.
When I was in Nassau, a friend of mine took me to San Salvador because there was a great celebration of Christopher Columbus. And so when I got there, I asked the people, I said, "Oh, are there any of the descendants of the people who live here, are they going to meet and be in this celebration?" And they said, "Well, my dear, they were all killed. They were wiped out." And so I did a little bit more research and backed up and found out that when Christopher Columbus, when he came to his stopping place, there's many places says he stopped. They brought the Bible and took the land, and they turned many of the people they met into slave servants to dig the gold out the land, and they were terrible murderers and plunderers. And so if you're going to take this down, the history is there. Put it someplace where it can be in context. So when you can go in and you don't look up to this great white deliverer who killed thousands of Native Americans who wiped out their whole generation, where you go to certain places where Columbus came and they're not there because they killed them all. So we can find out what was the context. So that's one part of it. He says, yes, because and then the other part, I was born in Pulaski, Tennessee, which was the home of where the Klan was born. When I finally went there to see what it was like, they had one statue in the city, Main Street. It was a 15-year-old Confederate scout that they honored, where my great-great-grandfather was in the Union Army and was a war hero.
Wow.
But no one would ever know of him, but they honor the Confederates. And by the way, the Confederates did lose the war, you know, but that mentality, the Klan still marched in the place where I was born. White supremacy still reigns. And this statue is something the kids grow up with, honoring, not thinking anything. There's this white man in there, he must have done something good. And it doesn't draw you back that, you know, that we were the ones that fought and didn't even have freedom. So, I mean, you can't continue to honor the history that the white supremacist society gives us to honor. We have to do something about it. So I'm saying, you know, tear them down. But then my other barber says, well, one day there's a different culture and they may go to where Martin Luther King Jr. statue is and tear that down. So then what? You see? Yeah. So there's issues that you have to really think through on both sides. And I say, yeah, I would like more of them torn down and put somewhere where we can go visit them in context.
Okay, well, we're coming to the end of the program. We can talk about all these issues and from the different perspectives and places. I think it's fascinating. It's you know, it's an important movement going on, and we need to understand so much more than I think some of the cliches are. But let me just say in closing, I'd like to invite you to make a closing statement, and also let us know if you're working on anything right now, if you'd like, you know, our listeners to know, and also where they can find you, you know, websites or whatever else you might have. I'll start with you, Dr. Reynolds, and then you, Carolyn.
This is my latest book, which I'm very happy to say is Coretta Scott King, her memoirs, My Love, My Life, My Legacy, that you can get it from my website, which is www.drbarbarareynolds.com or reynoldsnews.info, or call you and you can give my phone number. My next book now I'm working is on a book on technology and God, that God believes in, that he is dishonored and offended by much of technology. For example, this body that we have is authentic, but it's being taken and make artificial bodies, which are robots, and sent back into society, and we're going to honor those. You know, it's the time we spend with our gadgets, go searching. You know, we when we have a question, we ask Google. We want to spend FaceTime when we need to be facing God and seeing what should we do to be saved. And all of this is taking that relationship from God to something else that God is not pleased with. So I'm doing that, and also trying to do a little bit on how technology, great, because this is technology. We wouldn't be looking at each other if it wasn't, but how we have to just not accept it all without challenge.
Right.
Book, which I'm finished the first draft.
Excellent. And your website is drbarbarareynolds.com, correct?
Right. Or reynoldsnews.info.
Okay, great. Excellent.
And I
Karen,
want to say, I enjoyed being with Dr. Carolyn. I love your views. I love your presentation. Your home looks like a place that I wish I could come and see, but I certainly enjoyed being on with you, Dr. Carolyn.
Well, you are certainly welcome to come when this damn virus is over. I'll be honored to have you in my home. And you have to
when I have a mask on too.
So let's just hope this virus blows over. I'm not as stupid as Trump to say it's just gonna disappear, but I know that it's gonna give us a little ease up. Okay, great to talk to you.
And Karen, so could you tell us about what you're doing?
Yes, well, one of the things I instituted when we set up the Reggae Studies project at UE is the annual Bob Marley lecture, where we have a whole range of people talking about issues related to reggae. Now, it was named in honor of Bob Marley, but the lectures are not all about Bob Marley. That was certainly not my vision. So I'm now working on a selection of these lectures to be published by the University of the West Indies Press. So I'm editing that now. And I tell you, I've written about 700 newspaper columns. I used to write for The Observer in the 90s for 5 years. I've now been writing for The Gleaner for 11 years. So one a week for all of that time is holy. So I'm editing. Once I finish the Bob Marley lectures, I will start to seriously go through the columns. I'm trying to group them thematically. The first one I'm going to call Sex and Politics in Jamaica. So, we're going to group them by themes and see how many little books I can get out there, because nobody wants to read a big fat book. So, yes, these little books. So those are my 2 projects. So keeping me going.
And you have a website?
Yes, it's really a blog. It's Carolyn Joy Cooper. Joy is my middle name. Carolyn Joy Cooper at WordPress.
Okay, great.
It's a WordPress blog. So if you just Google Carolyn Joy Cooper blog, you will find it.
All right, great. And we'll put the links below when we put it up on YouTube as well for both of your sites.
And you did a great job, Mr. Dr. Megu.
Thank you.
Big man from me. With big program for us both. Congratulations on the program.
Thank you very much. Thanks to both of you for this enlightening and thought-provoking conversation. It's been a pleasure having you both on the program.
And it's been an absolute pleasure talking with both you and Dr. Reynolds.
It was wonderful. And
Thank
I hope
you.
somebody shows me how to share it.
We will. I'll send you the link for sure, right?
Okay. All right.
Okay. Take care now.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's it for this week's episode of A Story Club Global Politics. We were talking with our guests, Dr. Barbara Reynolds and Dr. Carolyn Cooper, on the topic of Black Lives Matter from different perspectives. Please join us again next week. And in the meanwhile, like, share, and tell your friends about us. Thanks again, and see you next week.
Thank you.